We are here tonight due to one person, Frank Hogan of Hogan and Harlan. Frank Hogan was the leader of the American bar in the 1920s and the 1930s. Frank Hogan, with his colleague and partner Nelson Hartson, of course founded this firm, Hogan and Hartson, which became a linchpin of the legal landscape of Washington, D.C. But in the 1930s, here's the hook. Frank Hogan represented Andrew W. Mellon, perhaps the richest man in the country, perhaps the most stressed out and worried man in the country, because in 1935, Andrew W. Mellon was being prosecuted for fraudulent evasion of his taxes by the United States government. And the civil prosecutor handling that case, which was in Pearl Harbor-size headlines, the case of the century, circa 1935, was the Assistant General Counsel of the Department of Treasury, the General Counsel of the Bureau of Revenue, the successor of E. Barrett Prettyman Sr., the Jamestown, New York lawyer, Robert H. Jackson. You see, he'd gotten this administrative job and did it for a year or so and found it relatively boring, and was a trial lawyer by temperament and was drawn to the fight of the era, and it was the Mellon case. And Jackson from the hinterlands was paired up against Hogan from the center, if you will, in a very high-profile matter, very hard fought in Pittsburgh. A trial lasting 11 weeks, and then various appellate phases and briefing and additional arguments and so forth. The net result of which, well, you can see in a couple ways. You can see the judgment of the Board of Tax Appeals, which sustains the judgment for Jackson, for the government, the liability of Mr. Mellon. You can also just go down the hill and take a left on Pennsylvania Avenue and go down towards the Capitol. And on your right, just before the jog, when it becomes Constitution Avenue, you'll see the National Gallery of Art, which was finessed, but in effect the settlement of that case. It was Andrew W. Mellon's gift to the country. It was a museum that in its donation in 1937 and 1938, Franklin Roosevelt referred to as Bob's Museum. Frank Hogan fought like hell for his client. His quip was, "There is no better client than a rich man in fear." And that was Mellon. And of course the bills were paid, and here we are at Hogan Lovells. But at the end of that, fighting like hell and losing on behalf of a client didn't mean anything enduring about the adversarial relationship with the counsel on the other side. And it's captured in this way. June of 1941. Chief Justice Hughes is retiring. Franklin Roosevelt is elevating Associate Justice Harlan Stone to be the Chief Justice of the United States. He has another vacancy in addition to the seat that's being vacated by Stone. He appoints Senator James Burns of South Carolina to one of the vacancies, and he takes his Attorney General out of the cabinet and makes him a Supreme Court Justice, Robert Jackson. He's 49 years old. The buzz had been moving across Washington for more than a week, but the first call to the Jackson apartment in the Wardman Park to congratulate Irene Jackson, Bob was still at the Department of Justice, was from Frank Hogan. In time, the Jackson-Hogan and Jackson-Prettyman relationship, of course, continues to twine and move forward. Frank Hogan leaves the scene. Barrett Prettyman Sr., of course, does not leave the scene. He ascends even further and becomes a judge of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, today what we call the D.C. Circuit. His name, of course, adorns that courthouse downtown, just across the street from Bob's Museum. And in time, Robert Jackson, as a Supreme Court Justice, is going through his yearly ritual of having law clerks, experiencing law clerks, liking law clerks, or learning from the experience of law clerks, and thinking about the future. Makes a decision. I never again will employ 2 law clerks, he decides. And I never again will employ a stranger. He had a year earlier traveled down to Charlottesville as a guest of the Forum at the University of Virginia Law School. He'd been hosted by the son of his friends Barrett and Lucy Prettyman, who then was a law school student at UVA, young Barrett Prettyman. When Jackson got to Charlottesville that afternoon, in October of 1951. He was exhausted. It was a sitting week. It had been a grueling week. It was late in the week. And UVA, of course, a Supreme Court justice in its clutches, wanted to run him through his paces and show him off and take him here and there. And the law student, Barrett Prettyman, intervened. He took Jackson to the lodging, and he told Jackson, take a nap. Take the rest of the day off. I'll come back to collect you in a few hours for the dinner. You don't have to do anything. For Jackson, who knew this kid, knew this guy, knew this family, knew this talent, that was personal. And frankly, that was brilliant. Not tactically. I mean, as a matter of judgment about how to handle a Supreme Court justice. And then a couple hours later, Jackson, refreshed, was received and escorted by Barrett Prettyman and went through the paces of the dinner and the forum and the speech and so forth. And then thereafter knew young Barrett, not as the son of his friends, as a law student, as frankly clerkship material. And later that year, Jackson reached out to his friend, Judge Prettyman, to solicit an application from young Barrett to be his law clerk. You didn't miss the signal. You applied. He was hired. All of that, I think, would greatly please Frank Hogan. It greatly pleases all of us. It, of course, greatly pleases the Jackson Center and the Hogan and Hartson, Hogan Lovells law firm, the clients who Barrett Prettyman has served across his long and distinguished career.